Lilo and Stitch is one of the most important and underappreciated franchises in Disney history. When it began in 2002 with a theatrical movie, in the middle of one of Disney's darkest eras, it remained a symbol of hope that Disney could make heartwarming stories in the new millennium, and that they could still be both action-packed and emotional, at a point where many of the other films they were making simply failed to do so. And while its original use has fizzled out since the point where Disney got their groove together again, I still love it. It was a big part of my childhood. I would watch the movie many times on home video, then on DVD, go through the special features again and again, and of course, catch Lilo and Stitch the series on Disney Channel as often as I could. This was a mark that a Disney movie had quote-unquote made it, getting its own cartoons so more adventures with its characters could be thought up. But Disney shows based on their movies had a trend of being just okay. Never really bad, well, never say never, but the stories tailor-made for the characters couldn't be replicated all too often, and it was a no-brainer that animation would be cheaper. I'm super happy that Lilo and Stitch manages to circumvent both of these inconveniences and be a good show that holds up on its own, tells good stories, and looks really nice even today. It was my favorite show back when I was about 5, and I still have a soft spot for it. A well-deserved one. Lilo and Stitch's history can be traced back to 1985, when animator Chris Sanders sketched up an alien. Lilo and Stitch's history can be traced back to the mid-90s, where during a string of large, big-budget movies, Michael Eisner thought it good for Walt Disney Feature Animation to make a less expensive film, and called on storyboard artist Chris Sanders to make something based on some failed children's book idea he'd made a decade prior. One of this movie's defining traits, watercolor backgrounds, would come from this decision, a visual style that hadn't been used since 1941's Dumbo, another cost-effective film. But this wouldn't stop them from going for an original science fiction story, another massive deviation from the norm for Disney at the time. And it would be set in Hawaii, a location that had never been visited before in the mostly European-set Disney animated canon. After some trial and error, getting all the strange ideas into balance and making plot points, character dynamics, and action scenes more family-friendly after a lot of test screenings, Lilo and Stitch released as the 42nd Disney animated movie on June 21st, 2002, making back over 3 times its budget and receiving positive reviews. This is important to know, since Disney movies in the early to mid-2000s usually did poorly critically, financially, or both. This and The Emperor's New Groove were big exceptions, and both got shows eventually, since they were the only ones that held a candle to the Renaissance era in success. The Lilo and Stitch cartoon would come first, with a TV movie, Stitch the Movie, airing on August 26, 2003, and the show would then start on September 20th, 2003, first on ABC Kids, then on Disney Channel, and end on July 29th, 2006, right after another TV movie that capped the story off. The Lilo and Stitch franchise has continued since then, albeit at a fraction of the success it used to receive. It hasn't been the same since Chris Sanders, who oversaw the earlier projects and voiced Stitch, left for DreamWorks shortly after the series ended. However, there is a live-action remake of the 2002 movie coming out soon, and you know what that means. It'll be well received for a day, make hundreds of millions of dollars, then everyone will go back to caring about the original more than ever. It'd be harsh of me to call Lilo and Stitch a franchise zombie, since I can see it still has its fans in Asia where the new shows are made, but there's a couple reasons it hasn't stayed relevant in the West since 2006. Its makeshift purpose as a beacon of hope faded once Disney started getting better, its creator has moved on, and the original story ended on a high note. To summarize the original movie, for those of you still in the dark, an alien mad scientist, Dr. Jumba Jukipa, has been sentenced to jail for illegal experimentation, creating a small blue life form that can destroy practically anything. But Jumba's instantly granted the chance to capture the experiment once it's escaped captivity and landed on Earth, alongside a bumbling one-eyed sidekick Pleakley. But during its time on Earth, the experiment comes into contact with a small Hawaiian family consisting of just 2 sisters who are about to be separated, and the younger one, Lilo, adopts him and tries to make him a model citizen, to disastrous results. There's a little something in this movie for everyone. It's got bright, beautiful animation, and a lot of comic relief for kids, and a very serious story about love and belonging, and how it feels when that's threatened for older viewers. It may not be my favorite Disney movie, but it's floating somewhere in the top 10. Disney fans and critics, as I said, reacted well to it back then too. and a TV spin-off went into production alongside that TV movie, Stitch the Movie, which served as a transition more than anything else. The villain from the last movie, Gantu, is now ordered by the reformed Jumba's old colleague, Dr. Jacques von Hamsterville, to get him more of Jumba's experiments. You see, Stitch's experiment 626, which means Jumba made 625 other cousins before him, each with their own destructive purpose. It's a fine movie, not as good as the first, but it works as a sequel because it expands upon the lore of the original in an interesting way and shows how well Lilo and Stitch are starting to work as a team. After some hijinks in space, the movie ends with all their little pods being scattered across the island of Kauai, ready to be activated by water at any moment. And this is where the show starts, with Lilo and Stitch having pledged to find them all and eventually find the one true place where they each belong. Does this continue the themes of the movie, and is it an interesting direction to take the franchise in? Absolutely and absolutely. Hundreds of different experiments are out there ready to endanger the island in humorous ways? Sign me up! And it's also a logical expansion of Lilo's previous accomplishment of reforming Stitch. Now Stitch can help her with all these different new experiments, or cousins as Stitch calls them. Remember, they're his Ohana. This is another show with a very big cast if you couldn't tell, so bear with me. Lilo definitely seems a little older and smarter than she was in the movie, but she will act out depending on the plot. That's fine, it's good to see her change and stay the same. Stitch has been tamed, sure, but he's still the mischievous, impulsive, coffee-addicted alien we know and love. He benefited greatly from the TV format, because when he does go too far and loses self-control, it's not as frequent and isn't a main element of the product. Unfortunately, one of the biggest losers in the shift from silver screen to CRT was Nani. The seriousness of her situation isn't as prevalent in the show now that her family's got galactic support, so she's mostly phased out of the adventures being too busy with work. I acknowledge that they couldn't make Thunder strike another 65 times, and the rules of storytelling and character arcs are different for TV, but it's still a little disappointing. Because of this, they lean a lot more heavily on Jumba and Pleakley being Lilo and Stitch's guardians, which arguably is for the better since these are Jumba's experiments they're finding, and he's of more help to them. That doesn't mean he's fully rehabilitated, he still lapses into maniacal laughter and fascination with destruction, but he's usually called out for it, and it's so uncommon that I can tell he's good now. Pleakley is still fantastic as Jumba's naive sidekick, more often than not delivering the goods with jokes about an alien trying to understand Earth culture. But I should quickly address the elephant in the room. He's a crossdresser, a trait that's used for comedic effect, which was normal for media in the 2000s, but not so much now. The jokes have never really bothered me, since it's more we're giggling alongside Pleakley than insulting him, and I can tell from the general kindness of his character that it shouldn't really be bothersome to anyone else. Returning villains are a little stranger though. Gantu is far less threatening here, being demoted from aggressive bounty hunter to a bumbling assistant to a hamster. I didn't like this change at first, but it grew on me, and knowing how the series ends, I'm fine with the villain decay. But Hamsterville himself never really entertained me. He was just meant to be an annoying, bossy villain who hardly gets anything done himself. But they make up for this with the extreme opposite type of character being Gantu's sidekick, Experiment 625, Ruben. Easily the best character on the show. He has all the powers and abilities Stitch has, but just lazes around giving Gantu sass and eating sandwiches all day. It's strange that he worked so well, but since he's bouncing off a villain most of the time, his snark and laziness are far more forgivable. And he's voiced by Rob Paulsen too, what is there not to love? Moving on to Myrtle, what is there not to abhor? There are worse bully characters out there, but in the show, Myrtle has one of the main unavoidable problems with them. She's useless. In the movie, when Lilo was more of an outcast, Myrtle and her friends served to show how different Lilo was from other girls her age. In the show, Lilo's more emotionally mature, so Myrtle now seems like a rotten kid, and her friends aren't much better. They're sometimes more humanized, but only for a small portion of the show, so I can't tell if they're meant to be real characters like the rest. But the rest of the movie's characters, David, Cobra Bubbles, Moses, yes his name's really Moses, Miss Hasagawa and Ice Cream Man, have small bit roles where they stay in character, don't overstay their welcome, and keep the island feeling like a world. That's all you need really. There are some characters made exclusively for this show however. First is Mr. Jameson, Nani's boss, and since Nani herself doesn't get that much screen time, neither does Mr. Jameson, but he's fine. His son however, Keone, does have some importance as Lilo's crush. I don't think anyone likes him. I don't think he's a terrible addition, he's harmless all things considered, but he's the blankest of blank slates and doesn't say or do anything particularly interesting or relatable. Also, I don't think this girl's ready for a boyfriend.
My friends need to be punished.
Lastly, there was an effort to give Lilo a genuine friend in Season 2 with Victoria, who was also into weird stuff. Although she didn't have enough time to blossom and become something special, I appreciate the thought, I guess. And I'd say the main cast is balanced overall, and always add to the stories, which are very similar, but great at what they do. For instance, this experiment's good at making ice, a little too good in fact, and there was a shave ice guy earlier in the episode who was out of ice. So after a Matrix-inspired battle, I get it early 2000s cartoon writers, the Matrix is huge, this ice experiment is given a new job making more shave ice, and it can be happy. And why don't we call him Slushy? That's the regular formula for a Lilo and Stitch episode. If there was ever a genre like Creature of the Week, this would be it alongside the Pokemon anime. But compared to Pokemon, the experiments are more alien and destructive, which makes it more satisfying when they're tamed, and there's only one of each of them as far as I can tell. Now, you'd think that this very specific pattern would get repetitive across a 65 episode run, and golly gee it does, but I'm impressed they could come up with some original stories. Like, you've got some easy Saturday morning fluff, your accidental clones, your babyfication, but they're still creative and fun and are juxtaposed with episodes that are more original, which focus on character development. The writers knew that people who loved the movies would watch the show to see these characters again, and like I've said, most of them have maintained their appeal. If there's one issue that crops up now and again, and is more or less inescapable in Disney spin-off shows, it's that it sometimes feels less energized than its source material. Not outright boring, but considerably slower and more methodical than it should be. I was always invested personally, however, I'm not everyone, and if the appeal in Disney movies for you is the speed and tight plotting, you might be left worn out by Lilo and Stitch the series and its cousins. I think it's a necessary change though, to ensure the simpler plots can fill out a half-hour time slot, and the more complex ones aren't a constant stream of action or exposition. What I'm getting at is, the pacing isn't quite as fast as the movie, but it feels natural for a show. I'm just glad the animation is still beautiful. Again, it's a little less good than the first movie, and even Stitch has a glitch, but since those were already cost-effective movies, the style translated well into a series. The only major difference is Stitch's design has changed so he's bluer and pointier, and for 2003, the backgrounds are still gorgeous, and the character animation is still slick, high quality, and believable. Trust me, it was one of the first animated shows made from start to finish in high definition, as you'll see if you watch it on Disney+. Too bad Disney hates free publicity, so I can't screen cap from the app and have to rely on web rips from when the show was still new. I hope it still looks good. You'll notice I haven't elaborated on how the show changed between its two seasons, and that's because it didn't much. The starkest difference between them is that Lilo sometimes wore a green muumuu in Season 1, and even then not always. I prefer the red one though, it's easier on the eyes. Otherwise, the show stayed pretty consistent in animation quality and writing quality. But Season 2 did have a very odd revelation. Apparently, Lilo and Stitch takes place in the same universe as American Dragon Jake Long, The Proud Family, Kim Possible, and Recess. Yes, it's about time I talk about these crossover episodes. It was very strange to see all these other different cartoons interact with each other, but not entirely mind-blowing. This was the decade that gave us House of Mouse and Kingdom Hearts after all, and the first Lilo and Stitch movie's marketing heavily focused on Stitch interacting with all the Disney characters.
Oh, Bobby. Oh, Bobby.
Hey! You get your own movie.
That doesn't mean there weren't challenges in making Jake Long or Penny Proud fit into Lilo and Stitch's world, but I'm happy to say they overcame them. There was real collaboration between the staffs of each different show, even Recess, which ended years before, and at least they picked shows that would make sense. Could you imagine if they picked these instead?
You kids have some funky, fresh moves.
Here's how I would rank them. The American Dragon episode, Morpholomew, would go at the bottom. It's just fine. I liked the flirting between Lao Shi and Miss Hasagawa, but since American Dragon was still brand new at the time, I felt its integration into Lilo and Stitch the series kind of surface level and uninteresting. The Kim Possible episode, Rufus, would go right above it. Kim Possible was a great show, and they successfully made it as much fun as they could. And they even gave Kim something to learn, that kids are capable of fighting their own battles. It's a little preachy, but it works. The second best would be the Proud Family one, Spats, which I already talked about in my Proud Family review. Having an experiment that makes people argue led to some funny and justified insult humor, and it was good to see Penny save the day by figuring out how to stop fighting. She's a smart cookie. And my favorite of all the crossovers is the one with Recess, Slacks. The Recess gang are in Hawaii, and there's an experiment going around making people relax, which is an effective way of making itself unstoppable when one by one they all drop the mission. It's funny that something like this is being used for tension. It's perfectly ironic. And even though I haven't seen Recess in a very long time, that'll have to change, it was great seeing them all back and being forced to have a fun time. It's one of the show's best episodes, and here are some more. First up for season 1's good is Yappa, where Myrtle gets her own dog, which turns out to be an experiment too, and she and Stitch perform in a dog show in Honolulu. This was a good way to put Lilo and Myrtle on equal playing fields. Amnesio's power is giving people amnesia, which is funnier to me than it probably should be. And the fun part is seeing Lilo believe she's best friends with Gantu. Lenny. Sprout is one of the more intense episodes, with its eponymous experiment being a giant plant monster, but at least Stitch saves the day by wrangling it up like a cowboy. A bizarre idea needs a bizarre ending. 627 makes a point to prove that the higher an experiment's number, the more dangerous they are, as 627 is basically a stronger version of Stitch, but it's fantastic that his main weakness is a strong sense of humor. That works. Melty's another surprisingly good one. I mean, it's about Keone, but it's not really. It's about Lilo finding out that going back to the past to change a simple mistake isn't worth it, because the butterfly effect's a jerk. On the topic of sci-fi, remember Stitch's fascination with giant monsters? Well, he gets to become one in Short Stuff, in which Stitch dresses up like Guy Fieri for a while, then battles a giant enemy crab. Also, this is the best Reuben moment ever. One episode I have to talk about is Angel, the first appearance of Stitch's love interest, or Boochie Boo. Her power is a siren song, which proves to be a real threat, but sounds nice. I wonder who voices her. I should have guessed. But I have to say, my favorite season 1 episode was Bonnie and Clyde. For one thing, the experiments can talk in full sentences, and they manipulate Lilo and Stitch into having a rule-free life, which helps them with their criminal schemes. But Lilo and Stitch have a good reason for lapsing into a rebellious phase, and pay the price for their actions while still being respected when they help stop the rogue experiments. Now, there aren't that many lackluster episodes in Lilo and Stitch the series. The worst ones are usually the more forgettable ones. I guess Amnesio is real. Polio's about an experiment that can turn into a black hole, so why is it so dry? Well, Myrtle gets its pod by happen circumstance and just can't notice the strange markings on it. Tank is one of the 2 episodes to try and fail to humanize Myrtle's hula friends when they get to hang out with Lilo at the Elizabethan Fair, while Myrtle's stuck with Stitch. It's fine for the most part, but the status quo reverting at the end of episodes like this is really depressing. The asteroid also isn't too bad all around, but am I meant to believe that Cobra is okay with an asteroid hitting the Earth and not letting it be known to the general public? I'm unhappy that this is one of his only outings in the series, and sadly his most important one. Nosy's an experiment I bet everyone would like, a loudmouth gossip who keeps blurting out people's secrets at the worst possible time. I ask how? How can you not love a character like this? At least it isn't Bad Stitch, where his behaviour's called into question and a lot of needless pressure is put on him. First, he's gonna have to leave the Ohana if he fails. Second, he's sprayed with water again. You know, his one main weakness. The first part of the episode is a real bummer, and the second half, where Stitch really is turned bad by Hamsterville, is just... it's something, I guess. I see the merit in it, but I also see Jumba making counterfeit money, so I don't know what to trust. Moving on to season 2, Spike's a really funny idea for an experiment, making you 99% goofier. Couple that with a family trivia night so you get some tension coming from whether Stitch can bring himself to be that 1% smart. Shoe's my favourite episode. There's a horseshoe experiment that creates bad luck, which only adds more trouble to the gang's new bed and not breakfast operation. It's a fantastic comedy of errors. And Belle was about Lilo trying to prove to Myrtle that the night marches are real. Great to see them use a Hawaiian legend for a ghost story. That's very resourceful. Furthermore, all the scary stories the characters tell are weird for this kind of show, but excellent as well. Wishy Washy is one of the only episodes to give some focus to David, who's made a lot smarter by Lilo, who's using a wishing experiment to get him and Nani hooked up. It avoids so many of the pitfalls that smart episodes tend to fall into, And Lilo's reason for wanting Nani and David to be an item? Perfect. Remy ticks the dream episode box, and it ticks it as hard as it can. This is fantastic. Not just because they use it to provide some amazing visuals, but it adds more depth to how Lilo feels about her late parents and how it affects her mood. Lastly, there's Snafu, the one where Lilo and Stitch managed to break Angel out of Gantu's ship. Being one of the very last episodes, it was good to see Angel again. It more than made up for these episodes. Shush is the second episode about Myrtle's friends hanging out with Lilo, but only because Lilo misunderstood something Myrtle said because she improperly uses an eavesdropping experiment. Between that and repeating another already lousy episode, this one's definitely the worst. Two last episodes to cover, both 11-minute affairs. There weren't many, but they were mixed bags, with Ace being the worst of them. Jumper's being visited by his evil scientist friends, but there's an experiment on the loose that's doing good deeds and ruining his villainous reputation, something he shouldn't be keeping up this late in the show anyways. Then there's Whoops, about a clumsy experiment that destroys a long line of dominoes Pleakley had been making. That's the joke. I could see this being a 7-minute episode, and it still wouldn't be a very smart one. That all just leaves the TV movie finale, which aired on June 23rd, 2006, Leroy and Stitch. After redeeming all the experiments, Lilo, Stitch, Gantu, and Pleakley are forced to split off and go their separate ways. But they're confronted with one more emergency. Hamsterville has broken out of prison again and created his own evil experiment, then clones it into an army to take over the galaxy. So they're all called back together to stop this menace with a little help from these guys. Here's this movie's main issue, right out the gate. The first act's not good. I'm thrown an emotional curveball with everyone suddenly splitting up, and the interesting thing about this new situation is that they're all sad. It doesn't matter if it's the last time we ever see these characters, I still shouldn't be forced to see them mope about it. They do work out another compromise at the end though, so I can squint and see this as a jab at the separate ways style finale. But what I like about this movie, I really do like. Lilo and Ruben teaming up, effectively making him the last experiment to be named and redeemed, Aloha Oi and Elvis music saving the day, and all the experiments getting into a big battle with all the Leroys. It's all satisfying salad dressing for the final note. And there are a few other redemptions, Myrtle sort of, and Gantu whose villain decay managed to pay off. I think if they toned down the emotional tone and made it feel more like a celebration of all that Lilo and Stitch had accomplished up to that point, then it would be one of the best finales out there. It's not right to cry because it's over, but rather smile because it happened. And what happened was a pretty good show all around. As far as a Disney movie show goes, it's one of the best at adding and living up to what it spun off from. Really, the only thing I was disappointed by was that it wasn't 626 episodes long. I could watch this forever and ever, it's a comfort show for me. Now before I end this video and let my nostalgic bias really act up, is this a bona fide classic? Well, it's a perfectly good show. I don't think it was designed to be the best thing ever, but it's certainly not bad or low quality. It's got good writing, animation, and messages, and nothing about the original gets left behind or forgotten. Aloha for now. Remember, aloha means hello and goodbye. For now.
Can I play with this? No. That? No. How about this? No.